um, for the Democrats who tend to be more liberal in certain beliefs, like pro-choice. I guess they're for pro-choice, and you are pro-life. Is that correct?
Well, I actually feel like the terms pro-life and pro-choice have been an excuse to end the conversation instead of start the conversation. I think what's not always clear is that the issue of what should be moral and what is criminal are not always the same answer. Part of what morality means is people having choices to do certain things and then, having to decide what they think is right and wrong. For me, we have over 1 million abortions performed in this country every year. I don't know a liberal in the country who thinks that's okay, that we're living up to what we owe people in terms of giving them a real choice or a real option of pre- and postnatal care that we fought for, of trying to avoid unwanted pregnancies and unintended pregnancies. And I think from the conservative side, traditionally what you might call pro-life, I think people feeling like while any battle goes on about whether Roe v. Wade should be there or not, there are a lot of things we can do to help support people in our community and help limit the number of abortions that occur. In the health care bill, we made some tough choices about preventing taxpayer funding for abortions, even though these so-called Christian groups are out there claiming otherwise. The reality is we did make a very strong position on that. That upset many of the choice groups, and I certainly understand where they're coming from on that. But it's also true that women were paying 45% more for the same health care plans than men. That's no longer going to happen. Pre- and postnatal care, a pregnant woman is not going to be able to be denied prenatal care by her insurer now. Now, we know that's not just morally the right thing to do, but it's good economics, because money spent at the prenatal stage more than pays for itself in preventing things down the road. So I think sometimes our moral debates in this country end before they begin. People get a label that allows them to feel like they're being moral in one direction or the other, when really these again, if things were that simple, that it'd be a lot easier to walk the right path.
Okay, well, let me ask you this question from Valerie C. Her question is how has Mr. Perriello's faith influenced his approach to government? Both the congressman and his mother have been visiting churches and other explicit outreach to people of faith. People sometimes mistakenly think that only Republicans are people of faith. It would be good to hear how your faith has influenced your public service and vision for the future.
Well, as I said earlier, I think our country is best when we have a sense of what's possible that's beyond the standards of the time. And if you look at most of the great progressive movements in this country, they've often had faith leaders at the helm. The civil rights movement is a perfect example. It was ministers at the head of almost every one of those marches. And I think that's because when you tap into faith, there's a deeper sense of right and wrong that allows you to stick with a fight even when it's unpopular, because you believe that it's necessary. And I think that in the best of circumstances, which I think we all aim for, that faith and real confidence in righteousness is combined with the humility that you might be wrong, and a willingness to continually listen to the other side. Not to take moral relativism of saying, well, whatever you feel, but to say, well, I respect that you're coming from that position. And so what I've tried to do in my governance is first and foremost ask what's right for the district. Start with what I think is the right thing, even if I know it's going to be harder to pitch or explain than the other position. Second, I have gone out and spent a lot of time meeting with people who disagree with me, including those who vehemently disagree with me.
Were those the town hall meetings?
The town hall meetings, met directly with various Tea Party groups, gone out with groups in certain sectors that we believe have been irresponsible and where we need to put some rules into place. And some of that is because I think that that's just what a man does, is you got to go out and face people and say, here's what I did and here's why I did it, and what a representative should do. But I also think it's part of being willing to remain open to the possibility that I was wrong and listen to them and where that truth is coming from. Now, sometimes that can lead to common ground. Sometimes it doesn't, but it's still important, for my faith tradition to come to that and be open to that possibility. Usually, there is some common ground, For example, I agree with the Tea Partiers on auditing the Federal Reserve and a lot more transparency in the federal government process. We agree on Second Amendment rights and other things. So you find those places of common ground. But it's also, I've pushed back on them and said, I believe the biggest threat right now in some ways is the government big corporation collusion. And so they're sort of looking at one piece of it, and I think missing the fact that part of why the government's gone in the direction it is because of the influence of the biggest corporations, and that their approach of saying, well, let's just give them total carte blanche to do what they want is better, is actually could exacerbate the problem rather than help it. But that's an important conversation to have.
Okay, well, let's talk about some specific topics here. The stimulus package. Did this really help our nation?
I think it prevented a depression, and it may be the first time in American history that a president and a Congress have stepped up and prevented a depression. If you don't think it made a difference, talk to someone who has been unemployed and gotten benefits. Talk to a small business that got a tax cut last year. Talk to the 98% of Virginia families that got a little more money in their pocket through the stimulus. Talk to any parent who has a child in the public school system. Charlottesville and Albemarle County alone got $20 million in education funding. Think of what it would have meant if we hadn't done that here, just right here in Charlottesville, Albemarle County. That means that they would have either had to cut $20 million out of the schools, massive layoffs of teachers, or they would have had to massively raise property taxes. Neither of those makes sense. The last thing we should be doing to outcompete China and India is cutting back on education right now.
Okay.
And the last thing you want to do in an economy like this is jack up property tax rates, which would have had to happen if we hadn't done this. People can lob, their remarks from the sidelines, but we were literally staring at this country going off of a cliff. And we stood there and said, we're not going to let it happen under our watch. We also are getting broadband out to every public school in the district, to tens of thousands of businesses in the district. And John McCain's own economist said we would be at 16% unemployment if we hadn't done the things that were done. So this was a point. You have to remember also the Chamber of Commerce supported the stimulus. Reagan's economist, Bush 1's economist, Bush 2's economist. The sheer irresponsibility of the Republicans, not only to oppose all of this, but to have no alternative put on the table. The president said, tell me what you want to do. Tell me how we're going to prevent this $3 trillion contraction in the economy. And again, they said, well, our only answer is if it works, you're going to get the credit, and if it doesn't, we don't want any part of it. That's not an answer. That's not what adults do. And so I think, to look at it and say we did prevent that, and we made a down payment on America's competitiveness that we're starting to see pay off with things like the X Prize and the new energy economy, the new automotive economy, with making college more affordable. So more people have gone back to school in the last year and a half, gone back to community college, gone to trade schools, gone to universities to get the training so that when the economy picks up, we have a more competitive workforce than we went into this with. So, I think that it was very important.
Okay, the national debt. We are now trillions of dollars in debt. Is that correct?
Yes.
Why so much spending? Why so much? Why do we constantly keep getting in debt? Spending that's putting us in debt.
Well, there are a few things that cause this, and the first thing that really got us into trouble, at least over the last 10 or 12 years, was that the Republicans got rid of the rules that said you have to pay for things as you go. When President Bush came into office and the Republicans had the Congress. Before that, it was a very simple rule. If you wanted to do something, you had to pay for it. Bill Clinton had fought really hard to get those rules into place because he knew, and I've gotten in trouble for saying this, if you don't tie Congress's hands, they will keep spending the money. So they tied Congress's hands, and it made a difference. We had a surplus. President Bush untied those hands, the Republicans untied those hands, and Congress started stealing from the people again. We have put those rules back into place, and we are moving in the direction of that. So one problem was they got rid of the rules. The second problem is, as any family knows, you gotta save a little during the good times because there could be rougher times around the corner.
There will be rougher times.
There will be. That's
Inevitably.
right. And you don't want to go into those rough times with no cash on hand. You want to go into that time where maybe you got laid off, or maybe someone in the family got sick, or maybe there was an unexpected pregnancy and all of a sudden you got a kid on the way. You want to have a little savings then. And the same thing is true of the country. We hit a horrible economic situation. And instead of having a little surplus out there that we could spend to get through the bad times, we had nothing. You see China and other countries buying during this recession because things are undervalued. We don't have the resources to do that. So that was the second big problem. We didn't have the savings. Virginia did. Governor Warner and Governor Kane had built up a surplus during the good times. They could have just, spent it willy-nilly. They saved that to help Virginia soften the blow during these tough economic times. That's what responsible people do. So to get this thing turned around, we got to get the rules back in place that prevent Congress from being able to spend money it doesn't have. We also have to look at a structural deficit, which is when people aren't making as much money, they're not paying as much taxes, and more people are having to get benefits. Getting this economy turned around is obviously one of the best ways to get the deficit under control. But the president has taken a very important stance, creating the Bipartisan Budget Commission, which Republicans and Democrats alike had agreed was the single best way to balance the budget. The Republicans who wrote the bill, 7 Republican senators who wrote the bill, voted against their own bill. Because whether it was they didn't want the president to succeed, or because some of these corporate interest groups were worried that it was going to, we were actually going to mean it and balance the budget and get rid of the corporate welfare that's out there. And then the last thing I think to keep in mind is the Republicans just put out a plan called the Pledge for America. And it has a $4 trillion hole in the deficit. So after all this complaining they've done about the deficit structural deficit they put in place, they come out with a plan that blows a $4 trillion hole in the deficit. We've got to step up. We've got to support this commission. We've got to give it an up or down vote. And we've got to get the budget balanced.